Welcome to this week's BitShares DEV Hangout. This recording is brought to you by the Beyond Bitcoin crew. We welcome all BitShares members to join us weekly and discuss the latest news, updates, and developments. If you'd like to participate in our next meeting, then please join us live on Mumble every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Did you know the Beyond Bitcoin show now has a registered delegate? Please consider voting if you find our Hangouts and recordings useful. The delegate name to vote for is fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. Again, that's fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. The Beyond Bitcoin crew would like to send out a big thank you to everyone who's already voted and allowing us the opportunity to serve the BitShares ecosystem and our valued community members. So once again, welcome and please enjoy the show.
Welcome everybody to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. We're joined again this week by Bytemaster, CEO of Cryptonomex. He and his team have built BitShares from the ground up, and they are now moving into a slightly different role because we are indeed trying to create BitShares as a decentralized platform. So stepping back, but still working on the project if we want him and his team to work on the project. And that is what Bytemaster and his team will be doing. So with that said, the normal format of these Hangouts is for those who join up, they're more than welcome to ask questions after Bytemaster gives his updates and introductions to any projects or anything that he feels will be pertinent during the discussion. And then we will open it up to the community asking questions and some questions from the forums, where we have a thread that is a running thread where forum questions are asked, or where questions regarding these things are asked. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton on to Bytemaster. Would you like to start the race?
Sure. Now there's three main topics that I want to address this week. Privacy, names, and shorting. So in no particular order, I'll start with shorting. I started a thread earlier this week on the forum where I suggest getting rid of short orders and just allowing anyone to borrow as long as they put up sufficient collateral. And then after you've borrowed, then you can go place a normal limit order. The goal is to simplify the code so there's just one type of order, limit orders. And the borrowing and margin calls happens completely separate from the limit orders. So that was received. I don't think anyone had any negative comments whatsoever about it. It makes it a lot easier to think about. You just say, I want to borrow 100 BitUSD. Here's $200 worth of collateral. You can borrow it. So what this means is that as a user, you can update your debt and collateral at any time to any amount, as long as you maintain enough for the maintenance collateral requirements. The system won't care about anything other than that. If you fall below the maintenance collateral limit, you will be automatically margin called, and that will work as always. And you'll be margin called up until the either a black swan occurs or the short squeeze protection threshold is hit. Short squeeze protection is there to protect players in the market in the event that there's a thin market, and walking the order book would result in insane prices. So feed producers are completely in charge of what the short squeeze protection limit is, if there is one, as well as the maintenance collateral rate and the current feed price. So that's the main change in BitAssets 2.0. It still works as always with the forced settlement and everything else we've been discussing for BitAssets 2.0. The only thing we've changed is that you don't need to create a short order and have it matched in the market in order to create the asset. This is technically something that could always be done before. You could always short to yourself to create something. It just makes shorting to yourself a lot easier, and then you go forward. So Are there any questions with regard to that?
What is the reason for shorting to oneself? Just for anybody who's out there listening and kind of scratching their heads on the trade with regard to the trading stuff.
Sure. A prime example of where I would short to myself is I create BitUSD, and then I go and I want to sell it on a different market. I don't necessarily want to sell it for BTS. I want to go sell it for actual USD on like CCEDK. So it's a way for me to create some BitUSD. I've posted my collateral, and then I'm going to sell the USD I've created someplace else. That's the primary reason for shorting to yourself. The other is just so that you can get all the advantages of a traditional limit order without us having to duplicate the functionality. It simplifies the order book and everything else. But you short to yourself just so you can get some, and you're not actually short. Right? You're both simultaneously short and long. Your position hasn't changed. You've just created some BitUSD. You're not actually short until that USD leaves your possession. So now that I've covered that particular topic, I want to clarify, yes, this is different than the bond market. Bond market is different parties lending to each other with collateral. This is just straight up creating a smart coin or a bit asset. The next item I want to talk about is black swans. We've really been trying to make sure that the black swan handling is robust. The black swan happens whenever the value of the least collateralized short position, the value of the collateral falls below the value of the debt. That's called a black swan. The ratio between the least collateralized position and the debt is the black swan price, and that is the settlement price. So in the event that we get a margin call and the price at which the margin call tries to execute is unable to, the margin position does not have enough collateral to buy back enough BitUSD to cover the debt. That's the trigger event for a black swan. And in these black swan events, all margin positions are closed at that price, and the collateral, if there's any leftover collateral, it's returned to the parties that had surplus collateral, right? So they had more collateral than the least collateralized position. So they get that surplus back, but all the rest of the collateral goes into a settlement fund. And at that point, anyone can do the traditional forced settlement, but there's no longer any delay or any question about the price. From that point on, when you do a forced settle, you get the settlement price, and you get it immediately without delay. No more price feeds can be published. The asset can no longer be updated. It's basically dead asset walking. And but you can still transfer, trade, do anything else you want to do with the asset, and you can execute the forced settlement at your discretion. So there's several advantages for this particular approach to doing things. One is we don't have to go find all the contracts that are using this asset and swap it out. It's a lot more efficient to just cancel all margin positions than have to iterate through every balance in the system to track it down. Secondly,
so is it more like akin to a reset?
Oh, the asset's dead. It doesn't reset. You can't reuse it for anything else. The only thing you can do is continue trading it and settle it. So at that point in time, the asset becomes effectively a bundle of collateral that people are trading around until they finally decide to force settle. This means that a forced settlement of, if you have like nested bit assets, so bit gold backed by BitUSD, you don't necessarily cause a recursive black swan just because the base asset got forced settled. That was getting really messy very quickly. So there's that benefit. And the other benefit gets onto an issue I'll talk about in a little bit, which is the potential for privacy. If you have blinded balances, we've got no way to force settle those immediately. So we've got to postpone it until they unblind them and then request a forced settlement. So considering the privacy aspect as well, came through with this updated approach to black swans. So, are there any questions with regard to black swans?
Is there a reason why that has to happen?
Why what has to happen?
Why somebody would have to essentially publish their own, who owns these assets? I mean, wouldn't it be just akin to like a masked ID of some sort to have this privacy?
Oh, yeah, privacy is, that's a separate issue, but the idea is basically that there are these balances that we know add up to the proper amounts, but we don't know what they are. So if we're going to have that type of feature in the future, that means we can't, if you have BitUSD in a blinded balance, we don't know how to convert that blinded balance to BTS in a forced settlement, in a global settlement. So you have to unblind it first and then request settlement.
Do you see any workarounds for that? Like having the one that I can think of is having an account that isn't necessarily tied to me, that I use maybe, let's say, a computer that uses Tor, and I trade on over Tor somehow. And it's a blind account. It doesn't connect directly to me. And then
that's not what blinded means. So let's not confuse terms. That's not a blind account. That's a pseudo-anonymous account. That's what Bitcoin has. That's what BitShares has always had. In theory, the blockchain, everyone can see that account exists and they know exactly what its balance is. And in theory, we could have done a global settlement and just converted that balance immediately. So, but that would be very costly. So what we're doing right now is when a black swan occurs, the asset is basically locked in at a particular ratio. It can continue trading and it can be converted back to the collateral at the settlement price at any time thereafter. That makes the black swans very efficient, and the privacy use case is a added benefit to that particular approach. So just letting you guys know the approach to black swans, what's going to happen. When that happens, it means that all contracts regarding the asset are still valid, and we don't have to go and modify any other smart contracts.
So if this happened to an asset like BitUSD, would we just have to launch another one like BitUSD 2?
Yes.
Okay.
But the other one would still trade.
Yes. Black Swan should be very rare events. So if they do occur, everyone needs to know that they occurred, and we basically need to snapshot everyone's balances and get them settled over time. So there's going to have to be, but we don't want to halt the market. We want to start a new one that starts over with proper collateral from the beginning. So asset issuers will be responsible for making sure their maintenance collateral and everything else is set up to minimize the probability of a black swan.
And so is this something that will require Cryptonomex team to put up a worker proposal and have it done?
The delegates at any time can create new bit assets and start publishing feeds for them.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we cover this stuff, because there will be people who want these questions answered, and it's kind of helpful to give people an idea, because there's a lot of fear in the ecosystem regarding some of the uncertainty with this change, which we have to acknowledge that it is necessary with respect to cryptonomics. But at the same time, people were trying to figure out where cryptonomics ends and where BitShares can, is self-sufficient, and with which areas it's self-sufficient in. So, thank you. Riverhead here is asking, was it covered how uncovered shorts will migrate to Graphine?
Yeah, they migrate as is. There will be a margin position with the collateral tied up. Next topic, names. So when it comes to names, we've got an entrepreneur out there who registered 20,000 names that were non-premium names after learning that names could be transferable. We took action this week to say that only names registered via the faucet will be migrated, because we don't want people registering all names at a fraction of a bit share each. The idea is not to enable squatters. And because under Graphine, the registration fees will be vastly different than they are today under BitShares, this type of thing wouldn't have happened under Graphine, and we don't want someone to register 1 million names on day one because, well, if we register a million names on day one, then we're going to be using a gigabyte of memory all over again. So we'd like to keep the number of accounts in the system closely related to the number of actual users of the system, and that's our goal. But we also want to avoid taking back anything that someone has already earned or paid for according to the established rules. So we decided to grandfather everyone in so that this particular person, I don't know if they're here today, but they were invited to this hangout. They're basically squatting. That's good. They're an entrepreneur. They see value in names in our systems. They're willing to invest their money and time in doing that. And if they bought all those names, you better believe they have some plan for trying to sell them in the future. And that means marketing for BitShares. But I wanted to address the general rules and strategies going forward for how we can minimize this type of thing. One thing we've always had the freedom and flexibility on is changing fees. So an idea I have been pondering is having the account transfer or key update fee be $1 or something of that magnitude, so that anyone who's squatting or doing anything else, at the very least, they're going to have to pay $1 to the network when they sell the name. And that's something that, you know, the delegates were always free to change the fees on at any time, and it doesn't change things. They still got the name. It just becomes slightly more expensive to update your keys or transfer the name. So,
which really, for a single user, $1 shouldn't be too big of an issue.
Right. If you're updating your account or your permissions because you've got money on there, paying $1 to make sure change your key is cheaper than paying a locksmith to change your safe. So it seems like a reasonable fee, and it prevents some of the abuse that we have going on here. The other thing I was contemplating was charging a higher fee for names without numbers going forward. So the only names that are dirt cheap are the ones that actually have numbers in them. That should also prevent significant squatting. I do want to have easy, human-friendly names that are essentially free to register, because we don't want to have any barriers to entry to getting into the system. But that doesn't mean we have to open up the floodgates for someone to come and buy a million names and squat on them right out the get-go. Because while it might be cheap to register the name, if they're not real users, they're not paying real transaction fees, and it doesn't justify using gigabytes of memory to track all these accounts that are sitting empty and unused.
I have a question about this, and which is if it's only the names that are registered through the faucet, then that kind of nullifies any incentives for people to go out and market BitShares at the moment, at least looking forward. For example, I just sent an email to several friends of mine to say now's the time to get into BitShares. It's really low. It would help me out if you would when you create the account, to email me what that key is, and then I will send you funds to register the account. Now, under what you're saying now, those names won't even transfer over, if I understand you correctly.
All the names will transfer over. They'll just be prefixed.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's not what they're going to want, I'm sure.
Send them to the faucet. It's easier for everyone involved.
Okay, well, I guess I'll do that. But that'll cut off any kind of referral fees for me down the road. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that.
Actually, it won't, because no accounts created before BitShares 2.0 are going to have any referral links tied into it.
Very good. That clears everything up. Thank you, sir.
Here are a couple questions that are coming in. Fox is asking. He says here, without forking the code to restrict account registration, how is the forum announcement going to be effective? Consider external perceptions.
We have a plan for migrating. We've published in the migration rules on our website, and the faucet itself is already enforcing the rules. And any new users that don't have any funds, they're probably registering via the faucet. So it's the best we can do. Implementing a hard fork of BitShares to do all this stuff would just slow down progress. And I think this is no one's funds are going to be compromised.
Fox says rules on paper, not equal code running. Does that make any sense to you? I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Yes. So you can register your account right now. We've already announced that we're going to be upgrading in the future, and we've already laid out the upgrade path. If you're not okay with the upgrade strategy, then that's about the best we can do right now. We can't simultaneously announce that we're going to be doing something and have a discussion about it without people trying to game it in the interim. Is what it comes down to.
Fox is saying, what social contracts will Cryptonomex honor, ignore, and why? Please cover Quixote founders, PTS, AGS, BTS holders. Can we get into that a little bit later on after Bytemaster's finished with the initial stuff? I know that this is going to be something we're going to cover. I knew it from the very beginning because I've been watching both sides, and I don't know where I stand. I'm just listening to it and paying attention. There are issues that a lot of community members are bringing up.
I'll go ahead and get into that now. It's on my list of things to talk about.
Okay.
So Quixote founders, they've already received more than they gave. So we're done doing that. That's not a Cryptonomex issue. That's an Invictus issue. PTS, AGS, that's also defunct. We have BTS now. So BTS is the only one that we are considering moving forward. I think that hopefully clears everything up. As far as how Cryptonomex plans to license, we don't want to make any commitments to any particular strategies because there are just too many factors, and we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner.
For the record, Bytemaster, you might want to elaborate slightly more with regard to the PTS AGS. I asked a question which you answered very adequately that said that money, those investments basically ran dry near the end of the year. So if people didn't realize that, they might have some questions regarding why you're not honoring them.
PTS and AGS were honored with the merger last fall, and they've all got stake in BitShares, and BitShares has been diluted. They got 20% stake in BitShares, approximately. That's probably technically it's 19.9 something like that percent. So if you bought into PTS and AGS, the social contract has been completely honored, and by honoring BTS, we're continuing to honor everything. Now, this is just, these aren't required, right? It's always voluntary, and it was the social consensus of, how do we recognize that these people made this possible? Everyone who contributed to making this possible has been recognized, has received at least 20% of what we're doing going forward. So that covers everything in the past. Going into the future, if we're going to license someone a public blockchain that's going to compete with BitShares, we're going to require BTS to have 20%. But there are many cases where philosophy or application area or use doesn't make sense. It's to honor 20%, cannot be honored 20%. If this were to be licensed to a corporation, say Apple wanted to move all their books onto their own personal blockchain and have the shares in the blockchain represent shares in the company, well, Apple can't dilute themselves by 20% in order to give BTS holders a stake. So we'd have to have different terms for these companies. Other blockchains might not have tokens. So a blockchain that's tracking ballots for voting purposes might not have any currency on it whatsoever. So we're trying to leave that flexible. Generally speaking, though, if it's going to be a public blockchain that's open user, basically the same kind of philosophy as BitShares, and it's going to be widely distributed, we're going to require a 20% drop on BTS. That's just part of the overall license. Necessary, but not sufficient for getting the license.
Well, it seems like generally, I still am interested in PTS and AGS personally just because of the historical value of it to me. But with respect to fairness, BTS holders did get a stake in, PTS and AGS holders did get an ample stake in BitShares X at first. And then that was 50-50, correct?
Yes.
And then whenever the new version of BitShares emerged that bundled some of these services together, they gained another 20% on top of what they received in the initial launch, correct?
Yes.
So essentially what you're saying is that these share drops have made it so it does reflect the past ownership, the PTS and AGS holders, at the times that the snapshots were taken. So those people holding BTS today, if they hadn't sold anything off, they still have a representative stake that would be equal to, that would make it a perfect share drop item to actually cover the people who are initially invested and still believe in the chain.
Yes.
So that's for those who are kind of confused about this and don't really understand the history. That makes sense to me. Do you guys foresee PTS and AGS being something that is looked at in the future, or do you think that it's kind of falling to the wayside?
Those are things in the past. I would prefer not to bring them into the present or future.
Sure.
So we just do that. So someone asked a question, how do you license something to a DAC that is not a legal person? The answer is we don't license anything to the DAC. We're not licensing the code to BitShares. We're licensing the code to users for use with BitShares. So it's a license between Cryptonomex and each individual out there that says you can use this source code with the BitShares blockchain, but not with any other blockchain. It's very similar to how dual license works in other systems, where you can use it with the open source license for non-commercial use, and for commercial use, you need to purchase a license. That model has been used throughout the software industry. We're using the same thing. We are just replacing commercial use with BitShares. You can use it with BitShares, but nothing else. Now, if you come to us, we will consider licensing it for use with other blockchains as well. And like, for example, PeerTrax is going to be licensing the same tech, and they're going to have a similar deal that BitShares has. So that's the general strategy there.
It sounds like you're pivoting to really look at the adoption of the mainstream now. Is that fair to say?
We're pivoting to make money so that we can continue to produce great technology.
This is a good spot to ask a question that was asked here. Let me go ahead and pull it up. This is from Shentist. Who will be the owner of BitShares.org, and who will get referrals for the BitShares.org wallet?
BitShares.org is owned by Invictus, or probably continue to be owned by Invictus, and it's not going to have a wallet. I think we said that in the announcement, but after the Ripple trade fiasco, we decided to play it a little bit more conservative. Instead, we've got at least 3 so far, and possibly 5 or 6 different companies that are going to provide a hosted wallet for BitShares, licensing the software from us, giving us decentralization in the hosted wallet space.
What will happen to any accounts that were created on the existing wallet.bitshares.org at this point?
All those accounts are just private keys, and you can export the private keys and then import the private keys into the new wallet. So those accounts are still valid.
Will the brain key that you get from registering a new account on that share on the wallet.bitshares.org, is that something that's transferable? I read something that makes me question that.
That's a good question.
We're trying to follow the same key derivation policies that we used in the past. I am not intimately familiar with the exact status of wallet.bitshares.org and what time you did that. Wallet.bitshares.org has always been a beta test type thing, so we're going to use what makes sense. At the very least, you can import your account, and then you can transfer the account to new keys that are derived from the new brain key structure. So that's one of the benefits for having transferable account names, is that we can change the brain key structure.
Thank you.
There's another question here regarding the funding from Top Candle. What happened to Chinese funding? I thought that was provided indefinitely. Is that still available in emergency uses? And why the need for VC funding?
There's no such thing as funding something indefinitely. All funding has its limits. The investment we got from the Chinese to build Invictus has been used in part to migrate into Cryptonomex. So there's that aspect of things. Why do we need ongoing funding? Because software development isn't free, and we don't have sufficient revenue from BitShares itself yet to continue to pay for it. So we are looking at raising more money for Cryptonomex. We've got some money right now. Obviously, it's not enough. We're also looking for talented management and business development people that can take the company where it needs to go and really develop it into a first-class corporation.
What's the level of investment that you currently have secured? In other words, how much of a time frame do you have with the existing finances to conclude development of 2.0?
I'm fairly confident that we can sustain the team for at least a year.
Does that answer your question, Tom?
More or less. I mean, I would have expected a little bit more firmness or determinism in your answer, Bytemaster, only because the funds that you've got to invest in, the funds from the investors should be a fixed amount. I mean, they should be fixed commitments, so it should tell you how much your burn rate. And obviously, the burn rate could change, but I wouldn't think it would change so significantly that you couldn't give a more firm answer as to, how much time you have.
I have rough estimates of burn rate, but there's lots of variables at play, particularly when investment is committed in the form of cryptocurrencies.
I see. Okay, thank you.
What's the Cryptonomex business model?
What is Cryptonomex business model? Is that the question that was just asked? Is very faint.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the question.
Our business model is to earn income from transaction fees on the BitShares network. We provide the software to people like CCEDK and several other exchanges, which you will hear about in the weeks ahead. They use the software, they get the referral fees and income from the network, and then they share a percentage of that with us as the licensing terms for our hosted wallet software.
Quite lucrative.
Well, along those lines, Star Spirit here is talking about is proposing a different business model. He says, what is your initial view on BitShares borrowing from the market to help fund development with loan repayment enforced by the blockchain? Depending on the size of such loans, the possibility of dilution may not still sit well with those who think of BTS as a currency. But if we think of BTS as a growing business in need of development capital, giving BitShares more flexible options in its own capital structure could increase our ability to manage for growth, while still doing it all on the blockchain. Clearly, there are strategic and other philosophical questions around this. Could you dig into this a little bit for us and provide your thoughts?
Well, there's always risks involved. In order for someone to lend the blockchain money, which is what they do when they hold BitUSD, they need to trust the collateral. For a company to grow, if you can get debt financing, that means you can keep most of your upside. Anything above the interest rate that you pay on the loan, you get to keep. Now, if you pay in equity, then you're giving away all the upside. There's two ways to fund a company: equity and debt. Generally, people will only lend if there's sufficient collateral backing it, which means that ultimately it's equity that's backing things. And if the company fails, the lender gets the equity, and you end up with dilution. Now, dilution is such a sensitive subject that we don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. We want to keep it within the budget that we've already allocated the one-time merger event. So 5 BTS per second is all the more dilution we will support. But how we choose to use that dilution can still be tweaked. We can pay it to a worker that buys BitUSD and then, or uses the worker proceeds as collateral to issue BitUSD. And then when we repay the loan to cover the position, then the collateral can be returned to the reserve pool. If we do it that way, then it would reduce the amount of funding we can do today, because we've got to tie up twice the value in the collateral, which means we can only spend half as much. But it means that if the blockchain takes off and we're able to buy back and cover at a profit in the future, that we ended up diluting less. So that's a trade-off that can be managed. Right now it can be done manually with the worker stating that's what they intend to do. In the future, we could perhaps have a worker proposal that funds automating that process so that the worker proceeds get converted into a margin position, and then the worker receives the proceeds. And then if there's a margin call, then and only then is there actual issuance of the currency. Otherwise, it stays locked up. So I think that's all I have to say about that funding model. There's probably lots of things you can do there, but I like to leave that for now.
So do you foresee the potential for competitors to come in and say, we would like to use that business model, and open up a discussion where the community gets to decide? Because it sounds like you guys have opened it up for BitShares to use pretty much any innovations that Cryptonomex builds in the future.
What we're saying is that we are willing to offer them to BitShares. All future work we expect to be paid for. Sure. It's not that we're trying to be greedy, but we need to, continue to fund and grow. So when we license something for use, it's the only way that workers actually have to guarantee that they get paid by the blockchain, and that their worker contract is fulfilled and they're not voted out immediately after they deliver the work.
Sure.
And it's not licensed until under the open source terms for use with BitShares, until BitShares has paid whatever the fee is for the feature. And it's a model that not just Cryptonomex, but any worker who wants to do work for the blockchain should do. Is they say, here's the work, it's open, everyone can read it and review it, but it's not under a license that allows it to be used with BitShares until payment has been made.
Speaking of workers, is there any provisions for being able to have conditions for the workers so that their tenure, if you will come to a close when their task is completed?
Yes, workers have a defined time period, a start date, an end date, and a vesting period. So they can only get paid during that window. And so there's basically a fixed budget that they can get paid. It's not a situation where it's like an employee where you're hired and then you're in until you're fired. It's more like a contractor where you're hired for a job and you're automatically fired at the end of the term.
Thank you.
Okay, so And this kind of goes back to what I was trying to ask, because it seems like we do get to still make the choice, right? And the community still gets to choose by either voting the workers' proposal in or not.
Right.
And so we do get to make that choice. And there might be, do you foresee potential competition coming in and actually saying we would like to go with different models and competing next to you guys on this?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Do you foresee potential competition? Because I think that there's going to, I really do believe at some point in time, people are already starting to wake up to what BitShares has accomplished. And they're already starting to see the problems with some of the other systems out there. And I foresee a big movement toward stuff like BitShares powered technology. And I'm wondering if you guys foresee the potential of many developer teams forming and coming over here and saying, well, we're going to peruse the forums, see what's going on, and see if there are any other business models that would be potentially, quote unquote, better with respect to a peer-to-peer funding model.
There's nothing that would preclude somebody from coming in and saying, hey, this privacy thing that Cryptonomex wants 2 million BTS for, we can do that for $1.5 million. There's nothing that precludes anybody from coming in, competing with any offer, any proposal to get something done. I mean, and unless I'm misunderstanding anything, the delegates would be in charge of that.
Well, the delegates aren't in charge of the proposals. Any worker can create a proposal and try to get it funded. The delegates are only responsible for changing parameters, so they can propose to change the fee structures or the terms or things like that. But
yeah, delegates was probably not the right. It should have been. I should have said shareholders, not delegates.
Right. The stakeholders are in complete control over who they choose to fund, and they should only fund people that are upfront with, these are the licensing terms I'm going to do it with. This is the development budget. This is the delivery date. And even after all the work's done, they still have to vote to enable the hard fork, and the witnesses need to rebuild and redeploy with that source code. So the witnesses kind of have veto power. If they don't upgrade their nodes to support the change, then the stakeholders will have to vote them out and vote in new witnesses that will. So there's this series of checks and balances of people that have to proactively approve of the changes to get them rolled out. But when it comes to funding them, the stakeholders are in direct control.
You see, this is the reason I ask these things, and I think that it's interesting because this is part of our history in the making. And we're largely walking through the dark trying to figure this stuff out as we go, right? And just like largely you guys are. And it's not always going to be done perfectly the first time around, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it all unfolds. So I have another question that was asked that below says, how can you license the Graphine code to a DAC that is not a legal person?
I've already answered that question about 5-10 minutes ago. The answer is we license it between us and the individuals for use with the blockchain.
I'm not sure whether I'm following to use for the blockchain. Who
we license it,
or who puts it out there?
No, we license it for individuals are the only ones that can actually run the software. So we license the software for use by those individuals only on BitShares blockchain. We're not licensing it to the blockchain. We're licensing the software for use with the blockchain.
So that precludes going off and creating a whole separate chain, basically.
Correct. No one would be authorized to use the code with that other chain.
They're not physically prohibited from doing that, but would never, I mean, they're not going to be corporate. They're not going to be acknowledged legitimately because it would be a violation of the license.
Right. It's going to come down to a matter of no chain that's going to get mainstream adoption is going to use that code. No exchanges would risk listing that asset if they're going to have to use code that's in violation of the license.
But fully decentralized DACs might be able to do it.
Sure, if someone wants to try to get a whole community out there to completely ignore the terms of the license and whatnot, we can't prevent that type of thing.
Well, you could license some other entity to create a separate DAC based on that toolkit too. So, I mean, It's not like they can't have other chains out there that are graphene based, but they have to have a legitimate license from you, which means you've been paid for it.
Correct.
Makes sense. And I would like to express one thing. I think that there's been a lot of concern among the community members, but I also want to say this, and I've tried to play devil's advocate on both ends. If you see the forums where I'm talking. But largely, I think this does come partially from the fact that most of the developers have only had one delegate, which if we had a market cap of, say, $200 million would not be a big problem at all. But in a constant crypto bear market, that doesn't really pay the bills for those developers who are working on this toolkit, right? So you guys were really, I think, forced to kind of adapt to the situation and the realities of it. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
And what are the conditions? Have you even thought about what the conditions would be when the delegates that will initially be the developers, when they will disengage and turn control over to anybody that wants to vote and run to be a delegate? That's an open issue. But I would hope that you guys have thought through what the conditions were that you would release and be confident that the new leadership were able to take over without any hiccups.
We don't have to release. It's the stakeholders that have to be confident that new leadership is ready to replace us.
So it's a matter of just having those delegates surface to say, hey, I want to become a delegate, and the community votes for them to be in place.
Yep, as soon as they're voted in, they're in.
So we just need to know what the rules are for those new delegates, which is something we can hash out over time here. That's about the only unresolved issue about that I can imagine at this point.
Correct.
Okay, and if you guys don't mind, there are a couple more questions, but one of the big ones is, a statement first off from Sitting Duck to just kind of drive home the point. Cryptonomex needs to separate themselves from being seen as the head for BTS to survive. Would you agree that that is pretty much a sound statement?
Yes.
So this is an action of necessity, largely as well. And
yeah,
Rockstar.
If we're seen as the head, then we are a target. We don't want to be a target. We want to be just a peer on a peer-to-peer network.
So this makes it so. Wow. So you guys are trying to leverage the decentralization for many different reasons here. But one of which the primary one would be to kind of, I'm assuming, to kind of avoid the legal issues that would entail being the head of this as well.
Correct.
There is one thing about decent. I mean, this is an issue regarding decentralization, and clearly right now we're quite centralized in the hands of Cryptonomex, and you've moved to set us in a new direction, and that will hopefully transition very well. But practically speaking, I spoke to Fuzzy, I think, in one of the forums questions about this. Is it very practical, at least for the foreseeable future, that anybody could even challenge? I mean, the development team is phenomenal and very innovative in producing. Being able to maintain this graphene code base as time goes on is what would be required if we're going to be truly autonomous. And did you see that possibility? That requires some education and some really diffusion of that technology to where lots of people understand it the way it was diffused in Bitcoin.
Yes, it's going to require other people to see an opportunity to come in and compete with us for developing it. If we're the sole source provider, then that means we can charge very high rates to the BitShares network to get things done. But if someone else thinks they can do it cheaper than we can, then that means that free market competition will drive the prices down and so on. In order for us to stay in business, we have to do that. So the market will sort out who's doing what on purely economic basis. And there's a lot of incentive to learn the code base. The code base is actually much cleaner than the old code base. There have been a few people that have looked over it and say it's a breath of fresh air.
By the way, speaking of that, out of curiosity, I've heard other people comment about it that there's very little comments. It's very clean code, but there's very little comments. Do you have an in-house stripper that strips out comments, or do you just not have a practice of putting comments in the code very prolifically?
I wouldn't say there's very little comments. There's more comments than under the old BitShares toolkit by an order of magnitude. Every operation and field is documented. So saying there's no comments, that might be true for some files, but all the files related to the behavior of the system and the definition of the operations and the protocol, they're thoroughly documented.
I'm speaking from a point of ignorance. I'm just going by what somebody else said, that they didn't feel there were very many, not that there wasn't any. So thank you for that clarification.
Right. We are making it our intent to document it. If you go to Doxygen, you'll see that most of the main objects are documented, as well as having like meta documentation, like modules and groupings of classes into things. So we're doing more and more in that area, and part of getting this thing out there for final release is to have every class and member documented.
Has anybody surfaced from the community that you're aware of that wants to take on the role of kind of being kind of like Andreas Antonopoulos was with his Bitcoin work, his book? Anybody in our community that's willing to kind of come alongside and look at the code and be a explanatory, a person that can teach it or help other people understand it?
Right now, that's what Max Wright's primarily doing, is helping people understand it and creating that kind of... At
the code level?
No, not at the code level.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, is anybody that's going to help teach the code.
That will probably come once we're done figuring out all the intricacies ourselves.
Okay.
Okay, and this is a question that's being covered, but Marockstar asked it, and he's been here for a long time, so if he's asking it, it's something that I feel is important for us to just push out there again. Cryptonomex shares, are they going to be issued as a UIA on the BTS blockchain? And the answer to that is no, correct?
The plan is yes, they will be.
Oh, wow. Has this changed?
No, it's always been the plan.
Oh, but okay, so it's just going to be done in a way that is, it's going to be actual stock, not just a user-issued asset.
Correct.
Okay, so you're pretty much pushing forward, showing people how it's going to be accomplished and how it needs to be done.
Yes, that's part of the reason for forming Cryptonomex, was we wanted to incorporate in a different state that had the ability to have shares that were not paper shares, certificates. So we're really exploring that. We want to figure it all out, and part of our business model will be to help other companies do the same thing.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So we are working with someone who is helping companies IPO on the blockchain, and there's going to be some proposals for feature enhancements to help facilitate IPOing on a blockchain, and you'll hear more about that in the weeks ahead.
Okay, and Carpet Ride here asked a question which I think it's pretty apparent, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. Would Cryptonomex be able to use intros to VCs, banks, or fintech startups? Essentially, he's asking, would you guys be interested in people directing them towards you?
Certainly. We are actively seeking out another round of funding with VC investment. We're looking to raise about $3 million in the next round.
Gotcha. And is there any benefit for anybody who does link you up with these people?
Yeah, talk with us about it. We'll arrange a deal with you privately.
Does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to? Nadilium, does Cryptonomex have a valuation as a company yet?
Yes.
Is it open for discussion?
I can't control what you guys discuss. I'm not going to comment on it at this point in time.
Is it at least $30 billion? No, joking. Okay. Well, one more question I'll ask, if that's okay with you, Bytemaster, and then I'm going to try to wrap this one up for this week.
Okay.
Favdisu asks, affiliate system. How can we check if someone registered under us as a referral? Is this recorded on the blockchain, split to register and marketer?
Yes, it's on the blockchain.
There we go.
We will probably need to write some tools right now to allow the referrer to know everyone who they've referred. Right now, the blockchain only tracks for each account who is referred by. So there's a two-way relationship there, and we're only tracking one of the directions because that's all that's needed for blockchain validation. But for statistics reporting and block explorers and wallets that want to display that useful information, we'll have a plugin for the witness node that will track that extra information.
I had one more question related to being able to audit the code. How practical is it? I know Bitcoin has been so explosive and there's so many people looking at it now that is probably very well audited. There's just so many eyes on it. But BitShares is new enough to where that's probably not the case, especially with Graphine. So in terms of making sure that, like, if we discovered that there was some freaking backdoor that some idiot put in there, how can we get rid of it? How can we find and discover it, first of all, and then get rid of it? That's going to require a pretty intensive code audit to make sure that can be weeded out. So what do you think going forward, Bytemaster, about the process of making sure that our code base is indeed solid and is highly scrutinized by peers?
Well, right now, the only way to get code into the code base is to go through one of the trusted people who has access to the GitHub. And so right now, you're trusting people like Vikram, myself, Nathan, and Ben not to put backdoors in there. We have a lot to lose if we put a backdoor, and you'll know exactly who's to blame because GitHub will reveal it. So there's a lot of liability associated with it. So it's going to be hard to get a backdoor into the system.
What about the integrity of GitHub itself? Could that be hacked and dates changed so that you wouldn't even necessarily know that the code was changed?
In theory, yes.
Well, I guess that's where peer review comes into play, and that's you mentioned 17,000 lines of code in the past. That's going to take a lot of time for somebody to go over and do a true detailed audit over to make sure that it's okay, which would cut any kind of virus or foul play at the hands of GitHub or anything centralized like that to get that out of the picture.
Well, you'd have to not just audit our code, but the code of any other software that you're running on your computer.
Absolutely. Not only that, but all the libraries that you use, third-party libraries that you use to make your code.
Right. So it's a open-ended problem that there is no easy solution to. Ultimately, it relies upon trust.
Well, I guess that could be somebody's backdoor if they have plans and wanted to orchestrate this control takeover. I don't know. I'll take this offline with you some point in time because it can be a rather deep subject.
Well, the one way that you could completely destroy a cryptocurrency is to get a backdoor and make all private keys public, and therefore no one's able to claim the funds, and you can't even do a share drop anymore.
Like if there was a bug in the SHA algorithm, for example.
Or anything that exposed all the private keys from all the users, that would basically completely obliterate the ability to share drop or fix. But as long as the private keys have integrity and are not universally compromised, the system as a whole will go on. And then
it's hard to compromise the individual private keys if they're distributed across the network. Now, obviously, there's more centralization in these web-hosted wallets and such, but if you have your own node, which maybe going forward we're going to see less likely chance of that happening, but if the private keys are indeed stored, distributed, decentralized all over the place, then it would be impossible to compromise all of them.
Right.
Assuming that the cryptography algorithm is not violated.
Right. All right. I think that's everything for now.
Fair enough.
We'll talk more next week.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bytemaster, for showing up and answering questions as always and being transparent about everything.